Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Strategizing a Modern Approach for DR and Ransomware Protection. Today's event is brought to you by Druva and produced by Actual Tech Media. Before we get started, you should know that we want this event to be an educational event. If you have questions about disaster recovery and the Druva solution throughout the event, we encourage you to use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We also have a number of handouts available for download, and I encourage you to download those now because they won't be available after the event. And finally, at the end of today's event, after the Q&A session, we'll be announcing the prize winner of the Amazon $300 gift card. You must be present on the live event to be eligible for this drawing. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. This gift card is being provided by Actual Tech Media, and the prize terms and conditions can be found at our website, events.actualtechmedia.com. And without further delay, I'm excited to introduce today's presenters. They are Mr. Peter Elliman, Director of Product Marketing, and Mr. Stephen Duff, Marketing Manager at Druva. They've got a great presentation lined up for you today. So with that, let's get started. Take it away, Peter.
Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Elliman. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at Druva, and here to talk to you about strategies for a modern approach to disaster recovery. And with me as well as Stephen Duff, also part of the Druva team. Quick slide here on our... Oh, thank you, Stephen, for saying hello. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Duff. I work in the marketing team at Druva and work on our AWS Workloads products, which is our Cloud Ranger solution.
Great, thanks. And I'll be covering our data center to cloud products. So today, what we want to talk about is really how threats and regulations are driving change. We see that with customers around the world, and that's causing customers to change not only how they protect their data, but also, of course, their disaster recovery options. And cloud really does make a big change in terms of what you can deliver, how you deliver, and how much it costs. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how cloud changes your disaster recovery options, what people are doing there, and then dive a bit more into the benefits of cloud-based data protection and DR. Also, some thoughts in terms of what to consider when evaluating cloud-based backup and DR, centered around a couple of key use cases here. So one is remote office, branch office workloads and data center applications. The other is cloud workloads. And then as well, really how a DRaaS solution can help you recover from a ransomware attack. So there's been a huge increase in spend across customers in terms of just data protection and management. And that's being driven by data growth, but that's also being driven by increases in regulation, compliance elements like GDPR. And finally, that's being driven, of course, by external factors like the increase in cyber threats that people are experiencing. So you see there's been an even greater increase in that cyber threat landscape that people are feeling. And below what you see on this slide is just a few examples of true dollar amounts that customers have felt. So in Norway, Norsk Hydro had a $40 million essentially estimated cost from a attack that they suffered back in March of 2019. That's huge. Delta Airlines, global airline based here in the U.S., $150 million loss essentially related to an outage, infrastructure outage that affected a large number of airports. Essentially was their ticketing system. And their own CEO, Ed Bastian, said in a video message to customers that they'd already spent hundreds of millions of dollars on technology upgrades and backup systems over the last 3 years, and yet they still had this outcome. And then, of course, GDPR continues to drive change with our customers, and Google themselves had a huge fine from the EU, a $60 million fine that related to some of France's privacy-related regulations. And so all of that links back to organizations having to have better control of their data, where that data is stored, who has access to the data, and of course, the ability to bring systems back online in the event of some type of outage or disaster. So why cloud backup and disaster recovery? Well, every company's on the journey to the cloud in one form or another. Gartner predicts that by 2025, 80% of enterprises are going to migrate away from and close their on-premise data centers. So that means they'll be going to some type of colo or going completely to the cloud. But running data centers on your own has become increasingly expensive and difficult. And really a comparable stat on the bottom is really just the percentage of workloads that are going to be either hosted or born in the cloud. So these are all really just directional indicators that I think we all know that's true about the movement to the cloud, the journey to the cloud. But I think what's sometimes shocking is really just how quickly it is starting to happen and sort of where companies will be just in a few years. 451 research in terms of DR, estimates that just in a year, 90% of DR will be done in the cloud. And that's part of what we're going to talk about here. And if you think about really the tier of DR like a pyramid, you have your critical tier 1 applications. Those are certainly very important, but you have a large host of tier 2 and tier 3 apps that from a volume perspective might represent significantly more data. And so, both of those, frankly, will be moving to cloud in different ways. The bottom stat here just talks about really the rapid growth of cloud DR. A stat from Gartner, and I'm going to talk a bit more about them in just a minute, but a 20% plus compound annual growth is huge in terms of the pace of change and adoption. A couple other stats here. Didn't want to go through them all, but just one more in terms of this last tier really represents companies that are trying to do more with the backup data. And more by moving some of your infrastructure and data into the cloud, it becomes a lot easier to deliver value-added services or to access them. And that might be disaster recovery as a service. That might be enabling test dev capabilities with your backup data. And so some numbers here in terms of estimates around the movement of that from Gartner, sort of a 30% piece. So a lot of different pieces that are forces that are driving change, and some stats that are showing that. So if you're to sum up, why a need for a DR solution is greater today versus, say, 10 years ago, where previously you might be thinking of more traditional disasters, power outages, floods and hurricanes. And while those are certainly increasing due to environmental changes that we're all experiencing, these are some of the other very real factors that customers experience. Malware, malicious insiders, departing employees, or there's potential for IP theft, or deletion of data. And then, of course, the sort of Murphy's Law accidental deletion, where data is accidentally overwritten inadvertently. And in a digital world, that can be, sometimes that can be quite a bit more destructive than perhaps might have previously been on an on-premise situation. So a lot of reasons for building that resiliency. I mentioned earlier that Gartner had some stats on that cloud-based recovery, and this is really a drill down in terms of that area. And what you see in the picture is, and this is a result of a 2019 survey that Gartner did to around 300 plus IT organizations. Most of these are larger enterprises with over 2,000 employees. But I think even with smaller organizations, there is a even greater move to cloud-based recovery. But what the picture shows is really from top to bottom, the types of DR that customers are considering or pursuing. At the top being, your most aggressive type, hot standby active processing of data. hot standby with automated failover, sort of all the way down to recalling your tapes from an offsite location in order to initiate some type of DR activity. And in the middle, what we have boxed here is cloud-based recovery. And that's really the one with the fastest growth across all the groups of choices that customers made. And what's most important, I think, to take away from this is that, and that came out of the Gartner piece as well, is that cloud-based DR is really sort of a scope change in the organization. So you're able to move from thinking about how do I bring an entire site back up to just applications, and that's a liberating change or a liberating mindset, if you will, because you're able to move more quickly and frankly start to deliver better value when you're thinking about an application piece rather than how do I bring the full site up. The other important thing is that really cloud DR capabilities, what customers can do with cloud infrastructure is really just continuing to grow and expand, both through providers like ourselves, but also through delivery of new capabilities by the cloud providers like AWS. And then finally, a big driver for many customers is that cloud DR can be a fraction of the total cost for what you might have had with the traditional site-based recovery. So just a lot of compelling reasons that customers are moving, and that's what's driving that very high CAGR, compound annual growth rate we saw for cloud-based recovery. So a little more detail on why cloud makes disaster recovery so appealing. I mentioned, lowers the overall costs because you can be focused on application. What does that mean underneath? Well, you're eliminating, DR hardware, software, and support that you might have had at another site, and it's freeing up those resources. It also sort of increases accessibility and workload coverage at a fraction of the cost. So remember, because you're more application focused now, and you're able to turn on different levels of both server capabilities as well as network capabilities to sort of bring up those systems. So the fact that it's on demand and elastic means that if you need a lot of horsepower, you can get it, but you don't always have to pay for that horsepower every day of the week or the year. And then finally, wider workload coverage, so you can support VMs and you can support cloud native apps. For many customers, moving to cloud-based DR allows to improve their business continuity SLAs. So often, you just were only servicing apps in a particular way. Maybe your RTO was going to be 8 hours. Maybe it was going to be 12 to 24 hours. The cloud often allows many customers to access a level of recovery time and recovery point that was never possible. And the ability to sort of layer in some automation through things like runbooks, again, makes that process easier because, again, it can be tested. And then finally, the ability of having all this running in the cloud, the ability to test it on a regular basis, means that the team's going to spend less time on compliance and auditing because, again, it's sitting in the cloud, tests can be run automatically, reporting that documents what you've done and how you've tested is much easier to run than if you had it at a secondary site. This is really just a bit more of a drill down to kind of amplify, right, the pre-cloud era, what many customers had and frankly still have today, which is dual hardware at multiple sites in terms of servers, backup software, backup hardware, maybe even in some cases tapes. And that just adds cost, complexity, and often can limit agility because you really are often going off of a bit of a one-to-one model. And the more offices or smaller offices you try to mix into this, the harder it becomes because some of these offices might be in far-flung locations. Bringing those offices back online from a central data center can be difficult. because of network bandwidth or other reasons. There has been, progress, certainly with new approaches to the infrastructure in the data center. So hyperconverged has brought a lot of benefits to data centers, but hyperconverged DR is still not the same as a cloud-based native DR approach. Often you're retrofitting something that has been built for the data center and putting it in the cloud. And so while you are able to sort of extend something you have in the data center into the cloud and use that for greater resiliency for DR, you are going to have really additional management complexity because the customer, are going to be managing your Amazon bill often for that infrastructure that you're putting in the cloud, and you're going to be managing that infrastructure bill. So you're going to have essentially multiple operations panels, multiple bills you're looking to reconcile. The LML, again, is something that's often designed for a data center environment where CPU and compute are often maybe not exactly free, but free CPU and free storage is in that sense is free. So moving it to the cloud means it's a lot more expensive, because if your servers always need to stay running, say running a deduplication engine in the cloud, that server's always running, it's going to be expensive to run that infrastructure in the cloud. And often that results in a higher storage consumption because you may not get true global deduplication across both on-premise and cloud workloads. And finally, it can be difficult to deliver on either RPO or RTO SLAs when you're moving some of this infrastructure into the cloud. A prime example just called out here is really just converting a machine image that you may have in the cloud and making it DR ready often is a big hurdle that customers face when trying to pursue a meaningful RTO. All right, so I'm going to talk about cloud-based data protection DR briefly from the Druva perspective. I think it's give you an idea for how we're solving some of these challenges customers face, and more specifically talk about a customer or two. Just a bit on Druva's overall SaaS platform or the Druva Cloud Platform. It provides data protection and DR for data center workloads, which I'm going to be talking about, for cloud workloads, which Stephen will talk about, and then for endpoints, which we'll have to save for another time. But all of that essentially is built on top of AWS, our ability to protect all these different workloads. And what it enables, what you see on the right side, is a substantially more efficient approach to data protection. So both for backup and restore and disaster recovery. It makes governance much easier for our customers. And when you have all this data in the cloud in a central place, it allows really greater intelligence. Data intelligence allows Druva and customers to sort of learn more and do more with that data. And so we're already starting to deliver some of these new capabilities. Disaster recovery as a service is one example, and we'll be delivering more in the coming months and years. So Druva's data center to cloud, data protection to DR, this is a brief architecture overview that shows really the workloads we protect on the left-hand side. And many of our customers decide to do a direct-to-cloud backup because that allows them to eliminate on-premise hardware and software. And backing up that data into an AWS cloud, we support really all AWS regions. So that gives customers the ability to control where that data sits if they need to meet compliance perspective. We also support VMware Cloud on AWS as well. So if customers are pursuing that, we're able to protect that. And if customers do have demanding RPO or RTO needs, we have a feature called Cloud Cache, which is essentially a virtual appliance that customers can deploy at will on any hardware of their choice. And we will back up to the Cloud Cache first, and then Cloud Cache will sync to the cloud and store up to 30 days of deduped and compressed backup data on the cache for both faster recovery, but it also allows you to meet RPOs in the case of constrained bandwidth to the cloud. But once this data is in the cloud, it facilitates both easy recovery to any location, so any server, or even within the cloud. And so you can recover into another VM in the cloud, or you can execute disaster recovery actions in your own AWS account. And so that's why we have this piece here that says the customer AWS account versus having it within the Druva cloud. And that's really what I'm going to talk about more here. So what are the benefits of cloud-based DR from Druva? Well, because you've backed up all of your data into the Druva cloud platform, you now have substantially more capabilities from a DR perspective. But first, let's talk about security. Your data is both isolated and an immutable backup. So it's not the same as the data you have in the data center because it's on a separate network. And so as a result, that provides or affords a bit of protection against things like ransomware that you wouldn't normally have. When you perform a DR action, it's in your own cloud, so you set up your own VPC, and you have your own security. So Druva has no access to your data because we use something called envelope encryption. So you have all of that. We optimize the approach to DR. So I mentioned earlier, you're not having to stand up or run AWS infrastructure all the time. You turn it on when you need it, and you turn it off when you're done. So in that sense, there's no standby copy. And then finally, we're able to meet very aggressive RPO and RTO elements. So RTO of minutes, roughly most of our customers see anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes RTO in terms of being able to get that conversion of the data done. What you also see here is the flexibility that we provide in this notion that you can perform DR across regions. And so you're not limited to any one particular area. Once it's in the Druva cloud, you have that flexibility, assuming your data can move to perform a DR in a different region. Because it's running in cloud, we're also able to layer on automation. So things like runbook orchestration, so that you're starting apps in the right order. Intelligence like VM failover validation. So there's a relatively new feature we recently announced where we'll validate credentials and signal to you that VM is really not ready to be, failed over. So you need to get the credential elements correct before you can be comfortable having it there in your plan. Important piece because one of the big reasons customers run into challenges with DR is because they haven't done enough testing, or often because credentials change and that wasn't baked into a script per se. The one-click failover and failback is also a pretty important element because often if you are executing a DR action, you want to have the ability to sort of go back to a different location or fail back to your original machines, wherever they may be. And Druva supports that, so you can do that. And then unlimited testing, as I mentioned earlier, is a pretty important capability because just testing once a year is often not at all sufficient to ensure that you're encompassing all the workloads and more importantly, have made the right assumptions about how applications will restart and the time it takes to sort of bring up critical applications. I love this story. A large pharmaceutical customer named Regeneron faced a number of different challenges. One was around data growth. They had hundreds of terabytes of data. Were experiencing 20% sort of data growth. They were looking to consolidate the number of tools they had. Those different tools created difficult processes And they wanted to enable recovery for a wider number of customers. So some of their customers were internal scientists and end users. And so their requirements really when they were looking for a new solution was to improve their business continuity and to lower their total cost of ownership. And their environment was a mix of remote offices as well as data center workloads. And they leveraged both Druva and the cloud cache capability I mentioned. And what they're able to do was really consolidate their tools down to one platform, improve their business continuity by taking advantage of DR in the cloud, and drive significantly lower costs. So they also took advantage of another capability that Druva is able to deliver through our cloud-based backup called long-term retention. So this company often has to hold data for long periods of time, 7 years, sometimes 20, 30 plus years or longer. And storing that backup data for that long period of time is quite expensive. Druva's long-term retention capability will automatically move targeted backup sets into a Glacier Deep archive. So really the lowest cost cold storage, if you will, available. And so it was really the combination of moving data protection to one platform and in the cloud, taking advantage of DRaaS to eliminate hardware they had at alternate sites, and then leveraging our long-term retention capabilities that really drove such a significantly higher TCO for them. And then lastly, of course, they did need this ability to sort of find or search for files, regardless of where that data lived. Because as we mentioned earlier, one of their challenges was making it easy for scientists or end users to get some of that data back. And that's, again, one of our capabilities is you can search for files regardless of where that data lives. All right, I'm going to switch it over. Time for Stephen to talk about DR for AWS workloads.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to start this section, which, as Peter mentioned, is going to cover the native AWS side of things. So we're going to start off with a very basic question. So that is, who is responsible for protecting data in your AWS environments? So this is a question that always comes up when we speak with customers. And to answer this, we're going to take a look at the AWS shared responsibility model. This is where AWS talk about security of the cloud. So what this means is in terms of the underlying infrastructure and securing the data centers that are available in a specific region, making sure that all cloud services are available within these regions, all of this is the responsibility of AWS. So on the other side of this, if you look at your own AWS environment, if you have one running where you may have one or more AWS accounts, and within each of these accounts you are storing, could be customer data or your organization's data. You will also have your network setup, VPN configurations, and associated VPC settings. AWS calls this security in the cloud, and the responsibility of this falls on you as an AWS customer. So what does this mean from a business standpoint? So basically, if you had an operational outage, say you had an accidental deletion or something went wrong operationally that brought down your resources, or if you work in a regulatory industry where you have compliance mandates to keep, all of these responsibilities, when it comes to safeguarding your data, you would have a key role to play in this aspect. So how can we make this easier for you as an organization to set up customized disaster recovery plans that's going to provide a certain level of automation? So just going to have a quick look here at our Druva Cloud Ranger solution, which is a SaaS-based solution designed on AWS for enterprise data protection. So what we offer is the ability to back up all AWS services that can be seen on the screen here, So that's things like your EBS volumes, any Amazon EC2 instances, pretty much all the databases that AWS offer. So if you're looking for a self-service approach that is going to be designed to scale across your entire organization, we provide things like global backup policies, multi-tenancy, the ability to do cross-region and cross-account backup copies, which are really important when you're looking to set up a DR strategy. All of this can be simply orchestrated through our easy-to-use interface. So if we extend this to DR and you want to create a DR failover site based on a production environment, or as Peter mentioned, your tier 1 applications or tier 2 applications, we provide the ability to easily clone your source environment. So with our VPC cloning feature, this is where you can actually easily replicate your network, your subnet security group configurations, all into a secondary region or a second account. So what this does is it actually ensures that your restored DR instances are set up in an identical environment despite being in a different AWS region or an account. So once you would have a DR site set up, what you can do is you can then create custom DR plans based on your organization's RTO and RPO requirements. And you can then go ahead and test these regularly, or you could execute a failover on demand if required. So it's basically an end-to-end process that we offer as part of our solution for AWS environments. So when it comes to considerations for your DR setup, I'm sure you'll have your own internal considerations for setting up these DR environments. But if you look at it from an AWS perspective, there are 3 different areas to consider. So the first one's around flexibility and availability. So when it comes to AWS, there's so many regions readily available, and as more and more of these regions become available, you're going to have more choice as well. So in terms of instance types or instance sizes that you can choose, the choice of cloud services that you can use, when it comes to DR setup, it's important to know that not all of these regions are the same, and all of them have region-specific dependencies. So let's take a look at instance types, for example. If you have applications that are dependent on a particular instance type, or if you're using cloud services that are only available in certain regions, then you'll have to ensure that these are both available across your chosen DR region, if that's going to be used. For example, if you look at US East, you can see that in the North Virginia region, this has 6 availability zones. So this means that there's a better availability of resources here. But if you look at Ohio, which is also on the East Coast, this only has 3 availability zones. So you need to consider this when choosing your regions for DR. The second factor to consider here is cost. And the great thing about AWS is that you only pay for the services you use. But at the same time, you're always thinking in the background, how can we bring these costs down? So if you were looking to factor this in from a DR perspective, it's important to know that if you're taking cross-region type DR strategies, there's going to be egress costs involved here, associated with the data being moved across regions. Likewise, not all regions are going to cost the same in terms of the data storage costs. For example, if you were based out of Europe, it looks like Stockholm works out roughly 11% cheaper as a region than Paris would. So this factors in the storage costs, the compute costs, and averages these out over a month period. So again, you'll see roughly about 11% cheaper. So what does this mean from a DR perspective? It means that if you're to pick a DR site and you had a choice to pick an alternate region, you could actually lower your costs from a DR perspective by choosing Stockholm over Paris. And the last part here is actually around compliance and security. So while you're set up your AWS environment, you may have a global deployment where various resources are required across multiple regions. And at the same time, you have to keep in mind that you may have data residency requirements. So if your data cannot travel outside the country that you're located in, then that same consideration will also apply to your DR perspective as well. And then you also have to look at the management and security if you're looking for a cross-account approach or a cross-region DR strategy. So you have to know that if you're using an IAM-based role or your identity and access management, they're account specific. So if you're going to set up another account, you need to factor this in as well. Now, why is this all important? So it's important because as you look to create your DR site and you look at your own considerations that will be tailored to your own environment, but you also have to take in the AWS dynamics as well. So factor these in and say, can I save on costs? Can I save on the management of resources? And how is this all going to internally affect how we create our DR setup? So, as Peter mentioned earlier, any environment that you have, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, they're not immune to issues that could go wrong. So that's the number one reason why you would have to have a DR strategy in place. For example, user errors can happen almost on a daily basis. There can be accidental deletions. You can have configuration updates that can mess things up. Any of these changes could potentially bring down your environment. It could be a malicious attack, or again, it could be an insider threat. But just keep in mind that the weakest link can always open up a security loophole. So we're going to take a look at some of these DR strategies for AWS in a bit more detail. So we often get the question, what's the right way to do it? And our recommendation has always been, well, it depends on what the number one pain point that you're looking to address. And depending on that, you then have a number of options available to take from a DR point. So we can start off with here, if the primary area that you're worried about is an operational issue that may happen, then when it comes to a DR setup, you might just start off by having something set up in the same account in the same region that you choose. You don't have to get too complex with this. However, this won't provide an air-gap solution for you. If you're an organization that's worried about the possibility of a malicious attack or a potential insider threat, then one way you can safeguard against this is to set up an isolated account with limited privileges within AWS, almost like a vault account. Or if you were worried that there could be a site outage or the possibility that an AWS region may go down, what you can do is you can actually set up a different account and a different region from a DR site perspective. And the final option we have here is if you still want to have a DR strategy within AWS and your organization is more worried about the real what if scenario, what if something really bad happens? What is the case where a region goes down or an account goes down? In that case, you can actually use the AWS infrastructure to your advantage, where you can actually set up your DR strategy by saying, okay, I can have 2 DR regions instead of 1, and still work with a different account. So this way, for example, if you are worried about a particular outage, if there's an outage in a particular region and everybody's going to the next closest region for these dynamic resources, then you will also have a secondary region to work with in case the resources run out in this failover region. So basically you've got a number of ways and different complexities to deal with, so no matter the strategy. But the strategy that you choose will always come back to your primary objective of what are you looking to safeguard against. So to summarize what we're looking for in terms of DR plans, if you're looking to set up a disaster recovery strategy on AWS, you always want to start with making it simple. So our single clone operation, which allows you to clone environments across AWS regions or accounts, then easily create customized DR plans to meet your specific RTO and RPO requirements across your organization. The second benefit we mentioned was the cost effectiveness. So as we're a SaaS-based solution, what this means for you is that we have zero DR infrastructure required in your environment. So you don't need to run any servers in your environment. We do everything based on APIs that AWS provide to orchestrate this. So again, there's actually no infrastructure at all you need additionally from a DR perspective. And in terms of security, so as I mentioned, we use IAM role-based approach. So at any point in time, you always control the permissions that you're granting Druva, and you always have visibility into this. But the biggest advantage is that we are a fully managed experience that you get. So basically what that means is while you're looking at your production environment, if you are really short on time or you're working as a small team, you don't want to worry about DR infrastructure and the upkeep of that. With us, that means there's no patching. You don't have to do anything to upgrade your systems. You will get live updates of any changes that come through in the platform. There's no maintenance downtime to worry about. And all of this is offered through a fully managed service. Again, as part of this, since we use AWS native APIs, we are also future-proof. We use the same native snapshots and AMIs that reside in your AWS account. And you can also see this data in the native format in your AWS account as well. But what this does is it actually allows us to extend day zero support to any region or any new instance types that AWS release. But implicitly, all of this being offered as part of a SaaS experience is the benefit you get with Druva. So in terms of what we get as cloud native DR recommendations. So the way we look at it is most customers tell us they always want to create an air-gapped environment. So similar to what Peter mentioned earlier, when you have on-premise, but you're looking to back up to the cloud and vice versa. So with the AWS native workloads, they will be looking to isolate it, set up a separate account as a way to go. And this ensures that this has limited access. So you now have a secure way in which you can create your DR strategy. We would recommend that you review your region choice every time you're setting up a new DR plan or new DR strategy. So when you're setting up this DR site, as we mentioned earlier, there are cost merits that you can take out of it. There's also dependent issues in terms of the services that you're going to be using. And you have to make sure that the instance types and all of these considerations are taken into account when you're looking for a specific DR site. So again, I'm going to go back to the challenges we mentioned earlier. Yes, AWS gives you a lot of flexibility, but all of this flexibility means that your environment is not static. So your environment's constantly changing, and you're seeing more and more options that are going to be requiring more and more changes. So if your DR environment is not kept up to date, you will find that one day when you're actually looking to do a failover, you'll see that your environment's now out of date and the failover is not going to work for you. So it's important to periodically make sure that your DR sites are always updated. And again, you can achieve that with the clone operation that we mentioned earlier. So for those of you who have set up DR plans previously, as Peter mentioned earlier, it's probably based on an application tiered way or based on your SLOs. So we would recommend that you should test out your DR plans at least once every 3 months. So that way you can ensure that your environments and the servers that make up the applications are all up to date. Again, we understand that from a DR perspective, there's a full process involved here. So it's not just your servers, but it's getting all the people involved as well to do a complete DR plan setup. But what we're talking about here is the key parts of it, where you can do a subset of testing just by ensuring that at least your environments are always kept up to date. So if we take a look towards our current customer base to see what regions they choose from a DR perspective, within the US, we see that Ohio is actually the primary choice for a DR site. And if we look at the European side, then we look at Ireland as a preferred DR site. And in terms of how often these DR plans are tested, what we see with our customers is that around 6 to 8% of these have an automated DR plan in place, with these plans being scheduled to run once a month. So with that, I'm going to pass back to Peter to continue the session.
Great, thanks a lot, Stephen. So just a quick kind of summary, because this really discussion is meant to be both about how cloud is changing your disaster recovery options, but also how DRaaS as a service can help you recover from a ransomware attack. And so one of the things that makes Druva's approach here different is we do have complete data protection, and by that I mean all of the major workloads from data center to cloud to even endpoint. As many people know, often ransomware comes in through an endpoint or an email type of thing, or accessing a file. And so our ability to really isolate your backup data is different than what you're going to be able to get on-premise. So that data isolation that we're able to provide is a key security capability. I think ease of use is also very important, and so the ability to enable self-service recovery and other elements of verification and automation as it relates to DR, things like runbooks, SLA-based plans, et cetera. All of those contribute to the ease of use, and that's important because often DR activities may be performed by people who haven't set them up or haven't always run them. And I think flexibility is another important element that you need in any type of DRaaS solution that you consider. And we offer that through things like granular recovery points, and other features like failover, failback, and the testing capabilities. And then, of course, no solution's really going to be able to move forward or provide value if you can't meet your service level objectives, and those are specifically usually defined as your RPO and RTO elements. And cloud-based backup is able to, certainly for data center workloads, and of course for cloud, is able to deliver on RPOs that are hourly and RTOs that can be in minutes. And so for many customers, that satisfies a large number of their workloads and requirements. So what makes the Druva SaaS platform? Well, one reason many customers are choosing us is they want to ride that cloud for the cost savings. So the constantly declining price of cloud infrastructure and cloud storage, we are often passing on to customers, so that lowering their price. And the long-term retention capability I mentioned, that's Druva leveraging AWS Deep Archive, is one where customers receive a 30% savings immediately on that data they're storing there. And the ease of deployment is huge for many customers, because many customers are seeking to minimize their involvement with hardware infrastructure as they move more of their applications to the cloud. And then, of course, simplifying management. So it's about both deployment and management. I think as Stephen mentioned, for both their cloud workloads and ours, there's no upgrades, there's no patching. You get new features immediately when they're available. That really allows customers to access value more quickly. You may not have heard of Druva, but we're certainly making waves around the world, and with analysts and with our customers, because analysts talk to customers. So on the Forrester Wave for business resiliency, Druva was named a strong performer, achieving high ranks there. And then as well with Gartner and other vendors that provide peer insights. So these are customer rated reviews. Druva came out as really, we received the Peer Insight Award for Gartner's DRaaS customer choice. That was back in October of 2019, with the highest ranking of any of the other vendors there, a 4.8 out of 5. And then just this February, specifically, Druva again got recognition as a so-called Customer Choice Award in the February 2020 rating that Gartner recently released. So it's not just us really talking about what we can do, but really customers acknowledging our focus on their challenges and helping them solve them in new and innovative ways. A bit more just on the scope of us, 4,000 plus customers. We're built natively on AWS, and a substantial amount of data, 150 plus petabytes under management. You can see some of the big logos and names we have there on the bottom, from worldwide companies like Marriott and PricewaterhouseCoopers to Verizon and other companies. So the next steps I hope you'll consider is to discover really a TCO savings that you might be able to achieve by moving to cloud-based data protection and DR as a service. Or, of course, we encourage you to consider a demo, or even better, start a trial. We'd love to help you in any of these ways. So I think we're going to jump to some question and answers here, make sure we can get to some of these in time. And I'm going to start out with Stephen. A couple of questions that came in on you, or for you, excuse me. Just can you tell, how does Cloud Ranger secure a customer's environment and data? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So essentially, we're an AWS Advanced Technology Partner. So what that means is we're actually bound by the AWS well-architected framework. So on a regular basis, AWS audits partners like yourself against this framework. So this obviously has a heavy focus on security. So we follow the best practice security protocols, which are recommended by AWS. And our access to your AWS environment from the cloud native side of things is all controlled through identity and access management, so IAM-based rules. So we would provide you with a CloudFormation script with the relevant permissions we require to run these jobs. And again, you would just go in and create a new IAM access rule using this script to grant us access to carry out these jobs on your behalf. Again, all of our clients, the data remains within their own account doing it this way. So there's configuration data items like snapshot tags, instance IDs, all that type of stuff that we need to manage client requests, and all of our data is encrypted both at rest and in transit.
Okay, great. One more question here is, how does the automated DR testing work? Can you just give a 1 or 1.5 minute overview of that? Yeah,
so essentially the way our automated testing works for DR is it's actually based off of our backup policy. So you would have a backup policy in place with us. So what you would need for the DR strategy is to have either a cross-region or cross-account backup policy. So by doing this, what it does is you would use AMIs for this. So AMIs are the best way to create a DR plan, because this has all configurations for your instances as well. So our automated DR testing functionality allows you to test these machine images that you have in your target environment to ensure that they actually work successfully in practice. So in our DR testing section within the platform, you can actually go ahead and choose the frequency of when you want to automatically test the plans and temporarily restore these to a new instance in your failover region or your failover account. With the testing, you can actually customize how long you want to keep these instances spun up in these environments. So you might say, okay, keep it up for an hour, and then after that period of time, you can tear them back down.
Great. Okay. And then there are a couple of questions on my side too for our data center to cloud backup specifically. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. We'll certainly always respond after the webcast. But how can I get confident that shifting to a DRaaS offering will actually work when I need it to? And I would say that's the best way to get confident about that. Well, mentioned recognition from analysts. So those are based on customer reviews of our product and capability. So that's one place you can start. You can go out to Gartner Peer Insights and read what customers, types of size customers. More importantly, I suggest you get a demo where you can see for yourself really just how easy it is to do. And of course, you can go from a demo to an actual trial, and that'll be a way that you can build your confidence both in the capability, security of the product, and then ultimately you crawl, walk, run. So you start with a couple of workloads, you start to move over, and you can start to test that and see how it can work for you. So that's what I would work, because often if you look at why restores or recovery fails in a DR situation, the lack of testing is usually one of the first areas. So getting confident that it's going to work is actually choosing an application, several applications, spinning it up, and actually starting to have regular tests of it. Another question was, have any of your customers, used Druva to recover from a ransomware event? And yes, the answer is yes. A number of our customers have suffered ransomware attacks and have used Druva to recover from those ransomware attacks quite quickly. A lot of times customers don't want to be public with that information. That's something we can always talk about sort of in a non-disclosure agreement type of piece, but definitely customers have. We even had a customer doing a POC, so a proof of concept, when they were actually attacked and were able to use our platform to actually recover data and their systems in a way that they would not have been able to do with their existing solution. So definitely people are using it to recover and to protect themselves. Important piece. All right, I believe that's all we're going to be able to get to today. So I definitely want to thank everyone here for the time. We hope to hear from you, and also want to thank Stephen for joining us and talking about DR for AWS workloads.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to our audience for joining us for today's event. We're always happy to see everybody here. Make sure you follow us on all of the various social media sites and all that good stuff that's out there. And we have a $300 Amazon gift card to give away. For today, that winner is Tony Don. I believe I pronounced that right. I'm not positive, but we will be reaching out to you after the event. And once again, thank you to everyone who joined us for today's event. Have a great rest of your day.